That Omar Mateen was a 29-year-old Muslim from Port St. Lucie, Florida, who had previously worked as a security guard. He was an American citizen, born to Afghan parents. He was from New York. We're getting more information. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Harridge has been learning more about Mateen. Joining us now. Catherine, what can you tell us?
Well, thank you, Brett. Within the last hour, I've had a series of conversations which have really reinforced a handful of points. One is that Mateen was known to the FBI as recently as 2013 and that a file or folder, if you will, was open on him. This is where the information seems to diverge. One of our contacts told us that the file was open because of his contacts with extremists. The other was that it was unrelated to terrorism, but the bottom line is that this was an individual who was known to the FBI. Second, what was really reinforced to us is that this is being investigated as an act of terrorism, but more specifically, one that was inspired by a foreign terrorist organization. There's what's called a social media scrub going on with his profiles on the web. I was told that he had a MySpace page and a Facebook page. Both of them are now down, which is typical in these situations, but not a lot jumped out at those sites about him having radical ties.
So like we saw in the early stages of San Bernardino, where eventually they got to inspired by ISIS,
Correct.
It seems like this was perhaps more cut and dry at the beginning.
They've moved to the inspired by a foreign terrorist group much more quickly than we've seen in previous cases. That says to me it's driven by data, most likely social media data or some kind of phone communication that he was having. As you opened your show, we just heard from Adam Schiff, who's someone who has been briefed already on the Intelligence Committee, who said that he had pledged allegiance to ISIS. I would tell you, based on one of our counterterrorism contacts who tracks ISIS and Al-Qaeda social media, that within an hour of the siege taking place, that a very senior Al-Qaeda account on Telegram began rejoicing in the siege. The timing was a little unusual because this, I don't want to say shows foreign knowledge, but it was very close to the inception of the attack. And then the ISIS leadership accounts began taking over the hashtags for the Pulse, which is another thing that we see, though not a claim of responsibility. But
Hashtag for the Pulse, the nightclub.
That's correct.
But
your point is very well taken, because they've moved to inspired by a foreign terrorist organization very quickly, and in my experience that tells you that it is data driven.
Quickly, there also was a web threat by ISIS tied
That's
to
correct.
ISIS, specifically mentioning Florida just 3 days ago. And some of these things just, you know, they go off and they make threats and nobody pays attention to them. But when something happens in a state where they mention, maybe they go back and look at it.
Right. I'd be a little cautious on that at this point, because there's been almost like a sort of rolling series of threats from ISIS targeting ordinary Americans. They began with the military, then they moved to intelligence and government officials, and in the last 6 months they've really moved to ordinary Americans. It's a little tempting to look at that kill list, and yeah, I wouldn't make that at this point.
Okay, we'll follow it. We'll head back for breaking details. Catherine, as always, thank you.
You're welcome.
There's more team coverage ahead. Fox News correspondent Anita Vogel coming up with new details on the investigation into Omar Mateen as this tragic day continues. A day in which the violence began to unfold at 2 in the morning Eastern time at the Pulse nightclub. And Peter Ducey, Fox News correspondent, is on the scene in Orlando with the latest on that. Peter.
And Brett, we're as close as authorities will let us get to Pulse nightclub. It's about a block and a half behind us, and then halfway from here to Pulse there is a command center. Governor Scott was just talking about what's going on inside of there. The best information that we have from authorities, who have been very forthcoming to a point about what exactly happened, is that at 2:02 last night, the suspect, who had driven up in his van from an area about an hour and a half away, parked his van right in front of Pulse and then engaged a police officer who was doing security there in some kind of a firefight. At that point, after the first rounds were exchanged, the suspect went back into Pulse. A number of people did manage to escape, but he held 30 hostages for 3 hours. We do not know exactly what was happening inside at the time. We have not heard from any of the hostages yet, and we have not heard very much in terms of specifics about what happened between 2 o'clock and 5 o'clock, which was when the SWAT team finally decided that they had to go in to try to rescue those hostages. They went in, they did rescue 30 people. They did kill this suspect. And in the process, one member of the 9-person SWAT team was shot in his helmet. He suffered a minor injury. He is expected to be okay. The photo, though, of the helmet is really a dramatic shot. You see just how close of a call it was for him. And it took about 5.5, 6 hours for authorities to clear the inside of Pulse. They knew that the suspect had a rifle, an AR-15 style rifle, a handgun, and some sort of a device, but they did not know exactly what kind of a device it was or if there were any other devices for several hours. That is why there was such an inconsistent victim count in the beginning. First thing this morning, 7 o'clock, the authorities told us that there were about 20 people dead, and we now know that that's because law enforcement officers, that was all that they could see from outside. It wasn't safe to go inside. 3 hours passed. They went in, they cleared the spot, and then they told us 50. I can tell you that when the casualty count, 50 victims inside, was announced, reporters and photographers gasped. It was a dramatic increase from the earlier figure, and we just hope it doesn't go up anymore, Brett.
Peter, great job down there, starting at the beginning of the day in those early news conferences. We'll head back for any breaking details. Thank you.